I walked into what I thought was my quarterly performance review that Tuesday morning, clutching my coffee mug and feeling confident about another successful quarter at TechFlow Solutions. Instead, CEO Robert Manning slammed client departure reports across the polished mahogany conference table, his face turning crimson as he screamed accusations that made my blood freeze. Security guards flanked the doorways like sentinels. Board members sat stone-faced around the table, their eyes avoiding mine. Manning's voice thundered through the executive conference room. "You're a thief, Candy. Pack your desk and get out before I call the police." My hands trembled, nearly dropping my mug as my entire world crumbled. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I sat in my car in the TechFlow parking lot, my mind racing to comprehend what had just happened. 5 years of dedicated service, countless late nights, and being their top sales performer meant nothing. I had built my reputation from the ground up, starting as a junior account executive and climbing to senior client relationship manager through pure determination and results. 3 weeks earlier, I had been working late in the office when I stumbled upon something that would change everything. While accessing the shared server to retrieve client files, I discovered a folder labeled Special Accounts that I had never seen before. My natural curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked through the encrypted files, finding spreadsheets filled with client names, payment amounts, and mysterious transaction codes that made no sense within our normal business operations. The numbers were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing through accounts I didn't recognize with client names that matched some of our biggest contracts. My stomach churned as I realized these weren't legitimate business transactions. Someone was running a sophisticated embezzlement scheme right under everyone's noses, using our client relationships as cover for financial fraud. Instead of immediately reporting my discovery, I made what I thought was a smart decision. I began documenting everything, copying files to a secure personal drive, and creating a detailed timeline of suspicious activities. I wanted to build an airtight case before making accusations that could destroy careers and relationships. The person I trusted most in this process was Sarah Chen, our Vice President of Sales, and my mentor for the past 3 years. Sarah had taken me under her wing when I was struggling to break into the competitive tech sales world. She taught me everything about client psychology, negotiation tactics, and building long-term business relationships. Her corner office overlooking Elliott Bay had become my sanctuary during difficult deals and personal challenges. Sarah's support had been unwavering. She advocated for my promotions, included me in high-level strategy meetings, and even invited me to her home for holiday gatherings. When I discovered the suspicious files, she was the first person I confided in, sharing my concerns during one of our weekly mentor meetings. "You're being very wise to document everything thoroughly," she had told me, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping thoughtfully on her glass desk. "Corporate fraud is serious business, and you want to make sure your evidence is bulletproof before involving legal departments or outside authorities." Now sitting in my Honda Civic with tears streaming down my cheeks, I realized how naive I had been. The missing clients that Manning accused me of stealing were actually part of the embezzlement operation I had discovered. Someone had been systematically draining funds through fake client accounts and kickback schemes, and I was being framed as the perfect scapegoat. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Check your email. Things aren't what they seem. A friend." My hands shook as I opened my laptop and logged into my personal email account. There, buried among spam messages, was an email from an anonymous account containing screenshots of internal TechFlow communications. The screenshots revealed forged emails bearing my digital signature authorizing suspicious fund transfers and approving irregular client payment schedules. The timestamps showed these emails were created during times when I had been out of the office on vacation or attending conferences. Someone with administrative access had been methodically building a case against me for months. The most devastating revelation came in the final screenshot. It showed a private message thread between Sarah and Manning discussing the Candy situation and how to redirect attention from our operations. My mentor, the woman I trusted with my career and personal struggles, had been orchestrating my downfall from the beginning. Sarah had used our close relationship to gather intelligence about my work habits, access codes, and client relationships. Every piece of information I shared during our mentoring sessions had been weaponized against me. She knew exactly when I discovered the suspicious files because I had confided in her immediately. That conversation had triggered the acceleration of their plan to frame me. Security guards appeared at my car window, tapping politely but firmly. "Ma'am, you need to vacate the premises immediately. Company policy during termination proceedings." Their professional demeanor couldn't mask the awkwardness of escorting someone they had known for 5 years. As I drove away from TechFlow Solutions for what I believed was the last time I felt something shift inside me, the initial shock and betrayal were transforming into something more powerful, a burning determination to prove my innocence and expose the truth. Sarah and Manning had underestimated me. They saw me as a convenient victim, but they had no idea what I was capable of when backed into a corner. The next morning, I woke up in my Capitol Hill apartment with a clarity I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. My laptop screen glowed in the pre-dawn darkness as I organized every piece of evidence I had collected over the past 3 weeks. If TechFlow's executives wanted to play hardball, I would show them what a real investigation looked like. My first stop was the Pike Place Market, where I met my former colleague Jessica Rodriguez at her favorite coffee stand. Jessica worked in TechFlow's accounting department and had always been straight with me about office politics and financial irregularities. Her dark eyes were filled with concern as she approached our meeting spot near the fish market. "Candy, what the hell happened yesterday?" Jessica whispered, glancing around nervously. "The entire office is buzzing about your termination, but the official story doesn't make sense. You stealing clients, that's ridiculous." I pulled out my laptop and showed her the anonymous screenshots. Jessica's expression grew increasingly troubled as she scrolled through the forged documents. "This is sophisticated identity theft," she said, her voice barely audible over the market's morning bustle. "Someone with serious technical skills and administrative access created these fake communications." Jessica revealed something that made my blood run cold. 2 weeks ago, federal agents came to the office asking questions about client payment processing and expense reporting procedures. They specifically asked about Sarah's department and showed interest in our largest client accounts. I thought it was routine compliance checking, but now I'm wondering if there's something bigger happening. We moved to a quieter section of the market away from the crowds and potential eavesdroppers. Jessica continued, "The agents were particularly interested in any employees who had reported suspicious activities or raised concerns about financial irregularities. They asked if anyone had been asking unusual questions about client accounts or accessing files outside their normal responsibilities." My heart raced as the implications became clear. The FBI had already been investigating TechFlow, which meant my discovery of the suspicious files hadn't been the beginning of the story. It was just my entry point into something much larger. The federal agents were running their own investigation, and I had stumbled into the middle of their operation. That afternoon, I made a decision that would have terrified me under normal circumstances. Using my maintenance access card from my previous part-time job, cleaning office buildings during college, I entered the TechFlow building after hours. The night security guard recognized me and waved me through, assuming I was retrieving personal items from my desk. Sarah's office door was locked, but I remembered her telling me about the spare key she kept in the fire extinguisher cabinet down the hall. My hands trembled as I unlocked her door and slipped inside. The space that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed ominous and alien in the darkness. I photographed everything I could find: appointment calendars, client files, and handwritten notes scattered across her desk. Hidden behind her motivational posters, I discovered a second set of books tracking payments and transfers that didn't match our official accounting records. The amounts were staggering, totaling nearly $2 million over the past 18 months. But the most shocking discovery came when I accessed her computer using the password she had carelessly shared with me months earlier. Her email account contained correspondence with offshore banking entities, cryptocurrency exchanges, and shell companies registered in countries with strict banking secrecy laws. Sarah wasn't just embezzling from TechFlow, she was running a sophisticated money laundering operation. One email thread made me gasp audibly. Sarah was communicating with someone identified only as Pacific Northwest Asset Recovery about neutralizing the exposure risk and implementing the contingency protocol. The timestamps showed these messages were sent the day after I confided in her about finding the suspicious files. A noise in the hallway made me freeze. Footsteps were approaching Sarah's office, and I could hear voices discussing security rounds and checking locked offices. I quickly copied the remaining files to my portable drive and erased any traces of my computer access. The fire escape window opened silently, and I climbed down into the alley behind the building just as the security team entered Sarah's office. Walking back to my car, I felt like I was living in someone else's life. 3 days ago, I had been a successful sales manager with a promising career trajectory. Now I was breaking into office buildings and uncovering federal criminal conspiracies. The evidence on my portable drive could either vindicate me completely or make me an even bigger target. My phone buzzed with another anonymous text message. Pioneer Square, tomorrow noon, come alone, Operation Clean Sweep. The message disappeared from my screen immediately after I read it, leaving no trace in my text history. I spent the rest of that night researching Operation Clean Sweep online, finding scattered references to a federal investigation into white-collar crime in the Pacific Northwest tech industry. The few news articles I found mentioned coordinated efforts between the FBI, IRS, and Securities and Exchange Commission to investigate financial fraud, money laundering, and corruption in major technology companies. Suddenly, everything made sense. I wasn't just a wrongfully terminated employee fighting for my reputation. I was a witness in a federal criminal investigation. The evidence I had been collecting wasn't just my personal insurance policy. It was potentially crucial testimony in a major prosecution. Sarah and Manning hadn't just been stealing from TechFlow. They had been using our company as a front for a criminal enterprise that reached far beyond corporate fraud. As I prepared for my mysterious meeting in Pioneer Square, I realized my role in this story was about to change dramatically. I was no longer just defending myself. I was about to become a key player in bringing down a criminal network that had been operating under everyone's noses for years. Pioneer Square's cobblestone paths were slick with morning rain as I approached the designated meeting spot near the pergola. My nerves were frayed from a sleepless night spent wondering if I was walking into a trap or toward salvation. The anonymous text message had provided no other details, leaving me to guess whether I was meeting law enforcement or criminals. A woman in her mid-40s approached me casually wearing a navy blazer and carrying a Seattle Times newspaper folded in a specific pattern. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a professional bun, and her sharp green eyes scanned the area constantly as she walked. She looked like any other downtown professional, but something about her purposeful movement suggested military or law enforcement training. "Candy Williams?" she asked quietly, settling onto the bench beside me. When I nodded, she continued, "Special Agent Patricia Williams, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to talk." She discreetly showed me her credentials while appearing to share the newspaper. "We've been monitoring TechFlow Solutions for 8 months as part of a broader investigation into financial crimes in the technology sector. Your discovery of those encrypted files and your documentation efforts have provided us with crucial evidence we needed to move forward with our case." Agent Williams explained that Operation Clean Sweep was targeting a network of corrupt executives who had been using tech companies as fronts for money laundering operations connected to international organized crime. TechFlow was just one piece of a much larger puzzle involving dozens of companies and hundreds of millions of dollars in illicit funds. "Sarah Chen and Robert Manning aren't just embezzling company funds," she continued. "They're washing money for criminal organizations involved in everything from cybercrime to human trafficking. Your client accounts were being used to legitimize dirty money by creating fake business transactions that appeared to be normal commercial activities." The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering. Sarah had been recruiting corrupt employees at tech companies throughout Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver, creating a network of insiders who could manipulate financial systems and client relationships. Manning's role as CEO gave him the authority to approve large transactions and establish new business partnerships without triggering compliance reviews. Agent Williams revealed that they had been hoping to find an insider who could provide direct evidence of the money laundering operations. When I started documenting suspicious activities and copying files, I had unknowingly become their best hope for building a prosecutable case. My termination and framing had actually created an opportunity for deeper cooperation. "We want you to go undercover," she said, her voice barely audible above the fountain's ambient noise. Your anger and desire for vindication are completely understandable, but we're asking you to channel those feelings into helping us bring down the entire criminal network. This is bigger than just clearing your name. This is about stopping organized crime from infiltrating legitimate businesses. The plan she outlined was both thrilling and terrifying. I would pretend to accept my termination while secretly gathering additional evidence through continued contact with Sarah and Manning. Agent Williams believed they would eventually approach me with offers to resolve our differences once they realized I possessed potentially damaging information. Over the next 2 weeks, I met regularly with Agent Williams in coffee shops, public parks, and bookstores throughout Seattle. She taught me surveillance detection techniques, showed me how to operate sophisticated recording equipment, and trained me to recognize signs that I might be in physical danger. The FBI equipped me with a panic button disguised as a car key fob and established emergency communication protocols. My role expanded beyond simple evidence gathering. Agent Williams wanted me to proactively engage with Sarah and Manning, creating situations where they would reveal more information about their criminal activities. This meant returning to TechFlow's orbit, despite the personal humiliation and professional damage they had caused. The first test came when I orchestrated an accidental encounter with Sarah at our mutual favorite restaurant in Belltown. She appeared genuinely surprised to see me, but I noticed how her eyes immediately scanned the restaurant for other diners who might overhear our conversation. Her warm smile didn't reach her eyes as she invited me to join her table. "Candy, I've been worried sick about you," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "This whole situation has been a terrible misunderstanding. Robert was under enormous pressure from the board, and I think he overreacted to some client complaints. I had to fight every instinct to confront her directly about the betrayal. Instead, I played the role of a confused and hurt former employee who was open to finding a path forward. I just don't understand how this happened, Sarah. 5 years of loyalty, and suddenly I'm accused of stealing clients I helped bring to the company." Sarah's response revealed more than she intended. Sometimes in business, people get caught in situations beyond their control. The important thing is finding ways to minimize damage for everyone involved. There might be opportunities to resolve this situation quietly, without involving lawyers or outside agencies. That evening, I met Agent Williams at Green Lake to debrief about the conversation. She was excited about Sarah's obvious interest in keeping me from pursuing legal action or contacting authorities. "She's worried about what you know and what you might do with that information. That fear is going to drive her to make mistakes." Agent Williams revealed that they had been monitoring Sarah's communications and financial activities since our conversation. Within hours of our restaurant meeting, Sarah had contacted several associates and made unusual transfers to offshore accounts. She was clearly preparing for the possibility that I might become a serious threat to their operations. "We've also discovered that Robert Manning has connections to organized crime families in Eastern Europe," Agent Williams continued. "The money laundering operation isn't just about corporate fraud. It's about legitimizing funds from human trafficking, weapons dealing, and cybercrime operations. Your evidence is helping us build a RICO case that could dismantle an entire criminal network." But as we walked around the lake, Agent Williams delivered news that made my blood freeze. "We have reason to believe that Sarah and Manning are aware someone has been gathering evidence against them. They've hired private investigators to surveil their employees and former employees. You need to be extremely careful about your personal security." That night, I noticed a dark sedan parked across from my apartment building. When I looked out my window an hour later, a different car had taken its place, but I could see the silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or face consequences." I called Agent Williams immediately, and within minutes, FBI surveillance teams were positioned around my building. But the damage to my sense of security was already done. I was no longer just gathering evidence. I was actively engaged in a dangerous game with criminals who had resources and connections I couldn't fully comprehend. The next morning brought an even more terrifying escalation. Manning appeared at my apartment door, accompanied by 2 men I didn't recognize. His usual corporate polish was gone, replaced by barely contained rage and desperation. "We need to talk, Candy. There are things you don't understand about your situation." Through my peephole, I could see that Manning was agitated and possibly armed. The 2 men with him looked like professional security or worse, hired muscle from criminal organizations. I activated my panic button and texted Agent Williams while Manning continued pounding on my door. "I know you've been asking questions and poking around in business that doesn't concern you," Manning shouted through the door. "Your curiosity is going to cause problems for people who don't appreciate interference. Think about your family, Candy. Think about your brother Tommy at the University of Washington." The mention of my brother Tommy made my legs weak with terror. Tommy was a junior at UW studying computer science, completely innocent and unaware of the dangerous situation I had stumbled into. Manning's threat was clear. My investigation was putting my family at risk. Agent Williams arrived with a full tactical team within minutes, but Manning and his associates had already disappeared. The FBI swept my apartment for surveillance devices and found sophisticated listening equipment hidden in my smoke detectors and electrical outlets. My privacy had been completely compromised for weeks. "This changes everything," Agent Williams said grimly. "They're not just trying to discredit you anymore. They're actively threatening you and your family. We need to accelerate our timeline and move to the final phase of the operation." That night, I was relocated to a secure FBI facility while agents established protection details for Tommy and other family members. The game had become deadly serious, and I realized that my quest for personal vindication had evolved into something much more significant. I was now a federal witness whose testimony could bring down a criminal enterprise that threatened innocent people throughout the Pacific Northwest. The FBI safe house in Kirkland felt like a different world. Sterile government furniture, bulletproof windows, and the constant presence of armed agents who spoke in codes and whispers. Agent Williams briefed me on the final phase of Operation Clean Sweep, while technicians fitted me with state-of-the-art recording equipment disguised as everyday jewelry and accessories. "Sarah and Manning are getting desperate," she explained, showing me surveillance photos of their recent activities. "Our financial analysts have tracked massive fund transfers to overseas accounts, and our intelligence suggests they're preparing to flee the country within the next week. We have one chance to gather the evidence we need for prosecution." The plan was elegant in its simplicity, but terrifying in its execution. I would contact Sarah and arrange a meeting under the pretense of negotiating my silence in exchange for financial compensation. The FBI believed that Sarah's desperation would make her willing to discuss details about their money laundering operations if she thought she could buy my cooperation. "The recording equipment is virtually undetectable," the technical specialist assured me, demonstrating the tiny microphone woven into my necklace pendant and the backup recording device hidden in my watch band. "Even if they scan you for wires, these devices use frequencies and materials that won't trigger standard detection equipment." My hands shook as I dialed Sarah's number from a secure phone line. She answered on the first ring, her voice tense with anxiety. "Candy, I'm so glad you called. We really need to talk about finding a solution that works for everyone involved." We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a corporate office building in Bellevue, where Sarah maintained a private consulting firm as a front for her legitimate business activities. The meeting was scheduled for the following evening, giving the FBI time to position surveillance teams and establish communication protocols. Agent Williams spent hours preparing me for every possible scenario. Sarah is intelligent and paranoid, but she's also arrogant. She believes she can manipulate anyone through a combination of charm and financial incentives. Use her overconfidence against her by asking specific questions about their operations, while appearing to be motivated only by personal gain. The next evening, I drove to Bellevue with my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would be audible on the recordings. FBI surveillance teams followed at a distance, and Agent Williams monitored everything through earpieces and hidden cameras. The office building was nearly empty, except for security guards who had no idea they were hosting a federal law enforcement operation. Sarah's consulting firm occupied a modest suite on the 15th floor. She met me at the elevator wearing an expensive business suit and her practiced smile, but I could see the strain around her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. "Thank you for coming, Candy. I know this situation has been incredibly difficult for both of us." Her office was decorated with motivational posters and corporate awards, creating a facade of legitimacy that contrasted sharply with what I knew about her criminal activities. She offered me wine and made small talk about mutual colleagues while I fought to maintain my composure and remember the questions Agent Williams wanted me to ask. "I've been thinking about our conversation at the restaurant," I said, accepting the wine glass with steady hands. "You mentioned opportunities to resolve this situation quietly. I'm interested in understanding what that might look like." Sarah's relief was palpable. She had interpreted my willingness to negotiate as confirmation that I could be bought rather than prosecuted. The truth is, Candy, there are business activities at TechFlow that go beyond our normal client services. Some of our largest accounts involve international transactions that require specialized handling. She poured herself a generous glass of wine and settled into the chair across from me. Robert and I have developed relationships with foreign investors who need assistance legitimizing their business activities in the American market. It's perfectly legal, but it requires discretion and sophisticated financial management. I leaned forward, appearing eager to understand the business opportunity she was describing. That sounds like the kind of high-level consulting work I'd be interested in learning about. Are we talking about significant transaction volumes? Sarah's eyes lit up as she began describing the scope of their money laundering operations in terms that sounded like legitimate business development. We're processing between $5 and $10 million monthly through various client accounts. The profit margins are extraordinary, typically 20 to 30% of each transaction volume. She pulled out her laptop and showed me spreadsheets detailing the financial flows, client accounts, and profit distributions. Her arrogance had completely overcome her caution as she revealed the intricate details of their criminal enterprise. Your client relationship skills would be perfect for managing some of our more sensitive international accounts. These clients require a level of personal attention and discretion that not everyone can provide. I asked about the specific mechanics of their operations, and Sarah eagerly explained how they use TechFlow's legitimate business infrastructure to disguise illegal financial transactions. Client accounts were created for fictitious companies that existed only on paper, while real criminal organizations transferred funds through a complex network of shell companies and offshore banking relationships. The beauty of the system, she continued, her voice animated with professional pride, is that every transaction appears completely legitimate from the outside. We're providing genuine consulting services while helping our clients optimize their financial structures for international commerce. But as Sarah became more expansive in her descriptions, I began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor. She kept glancing at her phone and checking the time, and her questions about my motivations were becoming more pointed and suspicious. "Tell me, Candy, how long have you been thinking about this conversation? Did someone suggest that you contact me?" My blood chilled as I realized Sarah was beginning to suspect that our meeting wasn't as spontaneous as I had portrayed. She excused herself to use the restroom, and I could hear her making a phone call in hushed, urgent tones. When she returned, her entire demeanor had shifted from friendly collaboration to cold calculation. "I've been thinking about our discussion," she said, settling back into her chair with a different energy. "Before we move forward with any business arrangements, I need to know more about your current situation. Who have you been talking to since you left TechFlow?" I tried to maintain my cover story, but Sarah's questioning became increasingly aggressive. She demanded to know about my finances, my contacts, and my activities over the past month. Her laptop screen showed what appeared to be surveillance photos of me meeting with Agent Williams at various locations around Seattle. "Candy, I'm disappointed," she said, closing the laptop with a sharp click. "I thought we could work together, but it seems you've been having conversations with people who don't understand our business model." The room suddenly felt smaller and more threatening. Sarah's corporate mask had completely disappeared, replaced by someone who was clearly capable of violence. She picked up her phone and sent a text message that made me realize how much danger I was in. "My associates are very concerned about information security," she continued, her voice now completely devoid of warmth. "They don't appreciate when their business interests are compromised by people who can't maintain appropriate levels of discretion." I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the office, and Sarah's smile returned. But now it looked predatory rather than friendly. "I'm afraid our business meeting is going to be shorter than anticipated. My colleagues would like to discuss information management strategies with you." The door opened to reveal two men in dark suits who looked nothing like corporate consultants. One of them spoke with a slight accent that I couldn't identify. "Ms. Chen will handle the situation from here. Please gather your materials and prepare for immediate departure." I realized that Sarah had discovered my cooperation with the FBI and was preparing to eliminate me as a witness. My panic button was in my purse, but the men had positioned themselves between me and my only means of escape. The recording equipment was still functioning, but I wondered if anyone would ever hear the evidence I had gathered. Sarah began packing files and documents into a briefcase, while the two men discussed logistical details about cleaning up the exposure and implementing the departure protocol. I was no longer listening to a money laundering operation. I was witnessing the final stages of a criminal conspiracy that included kidnapping and potentially murder. But Agent Williams and the FBI surveillance team had been monitoring everything. As Sarah's associates moved toward me, the office door exploded inward and federal agents flooded the room with tactical precision. "FBI, nobody move hands where we can see them." The next few minutes were a chaos of shouted commands, tactical equipment, and the metallic sound of handcuffs. Sarah's expression shifted from predatory confidence to shocked disbelief as she realized the scope of the law enforcement operation surrounding her. Agent Williams appeared at my side, checking my condition and ensuring my safety, while other agents secured evidence and processed the arrests. "Outstanding work, Candy. The recordings you gathered tonight are going to be crucial for prosecution." But even as relief flooded through me, I knew the danger wasn't over. Sarah and her associates were just one part of a larger criminal network, and their arrest would likely trigger responses from other members of the organization. Agent Williams confirmed my fears as we left the building under heavy security escort. "We've dealt with the immediate threat, but this investigation is far from over," she warned. "The people Sarah and Manning were working with don't appreciate losing their American money laundering operations. We need to move quickly to the final phase before they have time to regroup." The FBI Tactical Operations Center hummed with activity as agents coordinated simultaneous raids across 3 states. Massive wall monitors displayed surveillance feeds, financial transaction networks, and organizational charts showing the criminal enterprise we had been investigating. Agent Williams briefed me on the final operation, while technicians prepared specialized equipment for what she described as the most dangerous phase of the investigation. "Sarah's arrest triggered a panic response throughout their network," she explained, pointing to intercepted communications on the main display screen. "Robert Manning knows his operation is collapsing, and our intelligence suggests he's preparing for a final desperate attempt to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses." The scope of Operation Clean Sweep had expanded beyond anything I had imagined. Federal agents were targeting money laundering operations in Seattle, Portland, Vancouver, and San Francisco, simultaneously involving dozens of tech companies and hundreds of individuals. The criminal network had been using legitimate businesses as fronts for an international operation that processed nearly $50 million annually. "We need Manning to incriminate himself on record," Agent Williams continued. "Sarah's recordings provided excellent evidence about their day-to-day operations, but we need Manning's testimony about the organizational structure and international connections to build a comprehensive RICO case." The plan required me to return to TechFlow for a final confrontation with Manning. The FBI believed his desperation would make him careless about revealing information, especially if he thought he could still manipulate or intimidate me into cooperation. Every room in the TechFlow building had been wired with sophisticated surveillance equipment during the previous night's covert operation. But as we prepared for the final operation, Agent Williams received intelligence that made everyone in the operations center freeze with concern. "Manning's associates have been conducting surveillance on your family members," she said, her voice tight with worry. "We have reason to believe they're planning to use your brother Tommy as leverage to force your cooperation." The mention of Tommy made my stomach clench with terror. He was completely innocent, focused on his computer science studies, and unaware of the criminal investigation that had consumed my life. The thought of him being dragged into this dangerous situation because of my actions was unbearable. Agent Williams showed me intercepted phone conversations between Manning and associates discussing contingency protocols and leverage opportunities. The conversations were coded, but the implications were clear. They intended to kidnap Tommy and use him to force me to destroy evidence and provide false testimony about their criminal activities. "We've established protective details around Tommy and moved him to a secure location," she assured me. "But Manning doesn't know that yet. We can use his plan against him by making him believe he has successful leverage when he actually has nothing." The final operation was scheduled for the following morning. I would enter TechFlow ostensibly to negotiate my silence, but actually to provoke Manning into revealing information about his criminal network and international connections. FBI tactical teams would be positioned throughout the building, ready to intervene if the situation became dangerous. That evening, I called my parents and Tommy from the secure facility, unable to tell them the full truth about why FBI agents were providing them with protection details. "It's related to corporate fraud at my former company. I explained, hating the necessary deception. The authorities want to make sure everyone stays safe while they wrap up their investigation. Tommy's voice was filled with concern and confusion. Candy, this sounds really serious. Are you in some kind of danger? I wanted desperately to tell him everything. But Agent Williams had stressed the importance of maintaining operational security until Manning was safely in custody. I'm working with the FBI to help them with their case, I said, choosing my words carefully. It should all be resolved very soon. Just stay with the agents and don't worry about me. I can handle whatever comes next. The next morning, I drove to TechFlow with multiple recording devices and a direct communication link to the FBI tactical team. The building looked the same as always from the outside, but I knew that federal agents were positioned at every exit and monitoring every room through hidden cameras and listening devices. Manning was waiting for me in his executive office, but his usual corporate polish had been replaced by obvious stress and barely contained panic. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie was askew, and his eyes had the wild look of someone who hadn't slept in days. The confidence and authority he had displayed during my termination were gone, replaced by desperate calculation. "Thank you for coming, Candy," he said, his voice strained with false friendliness. "I think we can find a solution that works for everyone involved." I settled into the chair across from his desk, noting how his hands trembled as he poured coffee from an expensive carafe. The FBI had coached me to appear confident, but not aggressive, creating the impression that I held valuable information, but was willing to negotiate rather than destroy him completely. "I've been thinking about our last conversation, Robert," I said, accepting the coffee cup. "You made some points about the complexity of business relationships that I didn't fully appreciate at the time." Manning's relief was obvious, but I could see his mind working behind his eyes as he tried to determine how much I knew and what I wanted. Sometimes in business situations become more complicated than anyone anticipates. The important thing is finding ways to minimize damage for all parties involved. I leaned forward, appearing to be interested in finding common ground. "I'm curious about the scope of complications we're discussing. Are we talking about issues that extend beyond TechFlow's normal business operations?" Manning's response revealed the paranoia and fear that were driving his decisions. There are business relationships and financial arrangements that require careful management and discretion. Not everyone understands the complexities of international commerce and client service obligations. He stood up and moved to the windows overlooking Seattle's downtown core, his posture tense with barely controlled anxiety. "Some of our business partners have very specific requirements about information security and confidentiality. They don't appreciate situations where their business interests might be compromised." I asked about the specific nature of these business partners, and Manning began describing the criminal network in terms that sounded like legitimate international commerce. His desperation made him careless about revealing details that he would normally keep confidential. "We provide specialized financial services for clients who need assistance moving large amounts of capital across international borders." He continued, his voice gaining confidence as he convinced himself that he was maintaining plausible deniability. "The regulatory requirements are complex, but the profit margins justify the additional compliance overhead." Manning returned to his desk and pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be organizational charts and financial summaries. "Your skills in client relationship management could be valuable for managing some of our more sensitive international accounts. These clients require absolute discretion and specialized handling." But as he became more expansive in his descriptions, I noticed that he kept checking his phone and glancing toward the door. His confidence was rebuilding as he convinced himself that he could still control the situation through a combination of offers and threats. "Before we discuss specific business opportunities," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "I need to know that you understand the importance of maintaining appropriate levels of discretion about sensitive business matters." I maintained my interested but neutral demeanor. "I'm very interested in understanding how discretion translates into mutual benefit for everyone involved." Manning's smile became predatory as he interpreted my response as confirmation that I could be bought rather than converted into a witness. "Sometimes discretion requires demonstrating our commitment to our business partners' security concerns. They need to know that their interests are protected by more than just legal agreements." He picked up his phone and sent a text message, then turned back to me with renewed confidence. I think you'll find that our business partners are very generous with people who demonstrate appropriate levels of cooperation and very decisive with people who don't understand their security requirements. The threat was clear, but Manning had miscalculated badly. His arrogance and desperation had led him to essentially confess to running a criminal enterprise while threatening a federal witness who was wearing multiple recording devices in a building saturated with FBI surveillance equipment. But the situation became immediately more dangerous when Manning received a response to his text message. His expression shifted from confident manipulation to confused concern, then to growing alarm. "That's unusual," he muttered, typing rapidly on his phone. I realized that Manning's associates were supposed to confirm that they had successfully kidnapped Tommy, but instead they were discovering that my brother was safely in federal protective custody. Manning's leverage had disappeared, and his carefully planned intimidation strategy was collapsing. "There seems to be a communication issue with my associates," he said, his voice tight with growing panic. "But I'm sure we can resolve any logistical complications." Manning made several more phone calls, each one increasing his agitation as he realized that his criminal network was being systematically dismantled by federal law enforcement. The organizational charts on his desk showed connections to criminal associates who were being arrested simultaneously across multiple states. "Candy?" he said, his voice now devoid of any pretense of friendliness. "I think you and I need to have a very different kind of conversation." He moved toward his desk drawer, and I realized he might be reaching for a weapon. But before Manning could complete his action, the office door burst open and FBI tactical agents flooded the room with professional precision. "Robert Manning, you're under arrest," Agent Williams announced, her weapon drawn and her voice commanding absolute authority. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Manning's legs gave out as the full scope of the law enforcement operation became clear to him. Federal agents were securing evidence throughout his office while others processed his arrest with systematic efficiency. The criminal enterprise he had spent years building was being dismantled in real time. Agent Williams appeared at my side, checking my condition and ensuring my safety while other agents secured the premises. "Perfect work, Candy. The recordings you gathered today are going to complete our case against the entire criminal network." But even as relief flooded through me, I realized that the most shocking revelation was still to come. Agent Williams helped me remove the recording equipment, while FBI technicians secured the evidence from Manning's office. The tactical team was already processing his arrest, and federal agents throughout the building were seizing computers, financial records, and communication devices that would provide additional evidence for prosecution. "There's something I need to tell you, Candy," Agent Williams said as we walked toward the elevator. "Something about this entire operation that you deserve to understand fully." We moved to a secure conference room where several other FBI agents were coordinating the simultaneous raids across multiple states. The wall monitors showed tactical teams arresting Manning's associates in Portland, Vancouver, and San Francisco, along with real-time seizures of bank accounts and evidence locations. "Sit down," Agent Williams said gently. "This is going to be a lot to process." She pulled out a thick folder labeled Operation Clean Sweep, Asset Protection Protocol, and spread documents across the conference table. The first document was a federal employment authorization bearing my name and signature, dated 3 weeks before my supposed discovery of the suspicious files at TechFlow. "You were never actually fired, Candy," she said, watching my expression carefully. "Your termination was an elaborate piece of theater designed to protect your cover as a federal informant." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the documents, trying to comprehend what she was telling me. "That's impossible. I was escorted out by security. Manning screamed at me in front of the board. My access cards were deactivated." Agent Williams smiled and pulled out additional documents showing my continued employment status with TechFlow, along with federal witness protection authorizations and cooperation agreements. Everything that happened in that conference room was carefully orchestrated to establish your cover story as a disgruntled former employee. She explained that the FBI had been monitoring TechFlow for months before I discovered the suspicious files. When my initial documentation efforts came to their attention, they realized I would make an ideal undercover asset because of my legitimate access to the criminal operation and my natural motivation to expose the truth. "We couldn't risk Sarah and Manning becoming suspicious of a federal investigation," she continued, "so we needed someone who could gather evidence from the inside without triggering their security protocols. Your anger and desire for vindication made you the perfect undercover operative. The board members present during my termination were actually federal agents and prosecutors who specialized in financial crimes. The security guards who escorted me out were FBI personnel, ensuring my safety during the transition to undercover status. Even my emotional devastation had been genuine because I hadn't been informed about the operation until after the staged termination. "We couldn't tell you initially because your reactions needed to be completely authentic," Agent Williams explained. "Sarah and Manning were analyzing your behavior for signs of deception. If you had known you were working undercover, they would have detected the performance immediately." She showed me surveillance footage of Sarah and Manning discussing my termination in private meetings after the staged conference room confrontation. Their conversations revealed that they had been completely convinced by the theatrical performance and believed I was a genuine security threat who had been successfully neutralized. "Your job, your salary, and your benefits were maintained throughout the entire operation," she continued. "TechFlow's legitimate business operations were protected by federal oversight, and your professional reputation was preserved through classified employment records." Agent Williams pulled out financial statements showing that my salary had been paid continuously by the federal government as compensation for undercover work. My apartment rent, insurance payments, and other expenses had been maintained to preserve my normal lifestyle during the investigation. "What about my family?" I asked, still struggling to process the scope of the deception. Tommy's protective detailed the threats against my parents. She smiled and showed me additional documents. Tommy was recruited as a volunteer asset after we explained the situation to him. His protective custody was actually FBI training where he learned to assist with surveillance and communication protocols. "Your entire family has been part of the operation from the beginning." The conference room door opened and Tommy walked in wearing an FBI t-shirt and carrying a laptop computer. His grin was enormous as he approached the table. "Surprise, sis, I've been learning about cybercrime investigation and digital forensics. Agent Williams said I was a natural at it." My emotions shifted from shock to relief to amazement as the full scope of the federal operation became clear. Everything I had experienced over the past month, the fear, the desperation, the sense of fighting alone against powerful criminals, had been carefully managed to create the perfect conditions for gathering evidence against Manning's criminal network. "The kidnapping threats were the only real danger you faced," Agent Williams explained. "Manning's associates were genuinely planning to harm your family, which is why we accelerated the final phase of the operation. Your safety and your family's security were always our primary concerns." She showed me arrest warrants for 17 individuals across 4 states, along with seizure orders for nearly $30 million in criminal assets. The money laundering network had been completely dismantled, and the evidence I had gathered would be used to prosecute organized crime connections that extended far beyond corporate fraud. "Sarah Chen is facing federal charges that could result in 25 years in prison," Agent Williams continued. "Robert Manning is looking at similar sentences, plus additional charges related to threatening federal witnesses and conspiracy to commit kidnapping." The conference room filled with other FBI agents and federal prosecutors who had been working on Operation Clean Sweep. They applauded as Agent Williams presented me with a certificate of appreciation for exceptional service in support of federal law enforcement operations. "Your undercover work has resulted in one of the most successful financial crimes investigations in Pacific Northwest history," the lead prosecutor explained. "The evidence you gathered will be used to prosecute not just the TechFlow conspirators, but criminal organizations operating throughout the region." Agent Williams handed me a sealed envelope containing my official reinstatement to TechFlow Solutions, along with a promotion to Chief Ethics Officer and a substantial salary increase. "The company will be operating under federal oversight for the next year, while we ensure all criminal elements have been eliminated," she explained. "There's one more surprise," Tommy said, pulling out his laptop. "I've been working with the FBI's cybercrime unit to trace the international money transfers. We recovered almost all of the stolen funds, and the victims will receive full restitution within the next 6 months." The wall monitors showed news coverage of the coordinated arrests, with federal officials describing Operation Clean Sweep as a major victory against organized crime's infiltration of legitimate businesses. My name was being mentioned as a key whistleblower whose courage had made the investigation possible. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Agent Williams showed me surveillance footage of Manning's arrest being broadcast on national news. His public humiliation was complete, and the criminal empire he had spent years building was being systematically dismantled by federal law enforcement. "Justice isn't just about punishment," Agent Williams said as we watched the news coverage. "It's about protecting innocent people and ensuring that legitimate businesses can operate without being corrupted by criminal influences. Your work has accomplished both of those goals." 6 months later, I stood in federal court as the lead witness in United States v. Manning, watching as the judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison. Sarah Chen received a similar sentence after her extradition from Switzerland, where she had fled with stolen funds that were ultimately recovered and returned to victims. The criminal network that had been using Pacific Northwest tech companies for money laundering was completely dismantled, with dozens of conspirators receiving significant prison sentences. The recovered funds were used to compensate victims and support ongoing federal investigations into similar criminal enterprises. My role as Chief Ethics Officer at TechFlow involved working with federal regulators to establish new compliance protocols that would prevent criminal infiltration of legitimate businesses. The experience had transformed me from a sales manager into a recognized expert on corporate fraud prevention and whistleblower protection. But the most important outcome was the restoration of trust and integrity in an industry that had been unknowingly facilitating serious crimes. My testimony before congressional committees led to new legislation strengthening protections for employees who report criminal activities in corporate settings. 2 years after Operation Clean Sweep concluded, I found myself standing before a congressional committee in Washington, D.C., delivering testimony about the importance of protecting employees who report criminal activities in corporate environments. The marble chambers echoed with my voice as I described the journey from wrongful termination to federal witness and the crucial role that individual courage plays in exposing systematic corruption. The decision to document suspicious activities and report them to authorities should never require employees to sacrifice their careers or risk their safety. I told the legislators, when good people stay silent about criminal behavior, we create environments where corruption can flourish unchecked. My testimony contributed to the passage of the Corporate Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act, which strengthened legal protections for employees who report financial crimes and provided federal funding for witness protection programs. The legislation had been inspired directly by the lessons learned from Operation Clean Sweep and similar investigations across the country. After my congressional testimony, I returned to Seattle and the transformed TechFlow Solutions, where my role as Chief Ethics Officer had expanded into industry leadership on fraud prevention and corporate integrity. The company had not only survived the criminal investigation, but had become a model for ethical business practices in the technology sector. The Candy Williams Foundation for Workplace Integrity had grown from a small advocacy organization into a nationally recognized resource for employees facing ethical dilemmas in corporate settings. We provided legal support counseling services and educational programs that helped thousands of people navigate complex situations involving potential criminal activity. My relationship with Agent Williams had evolved beyond professional cooperation into deep personal friendship, and eventually something more meaningful. Patricia had left the FBI after Operation Clean Sweep to join the corporate security consulting firm we established together, combining law enforcement expertise with business acumen to help companies prevent criminal infiltration. Tommy had discovered his passion for cybercrime investigation during his volunteer work with the FBI. He completed his computer science degree and joined the Federal Digital Crimes Unit, where his skills in financial forensics and network analysis were making significant contributions to national security investigations. The personal growth I experienced through trauma counseling and family healing had been as important as the professional recognition and career advancement. Learning to process the fear, betrayal, and anger from the undercover operation had required extensive therapy and support from loved ones who understood the psychological impact of living with deception and danger. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the letters I received from employees across various industries who had been inspired by my story to report criminal activities in their own workplaces. Teachers who exposed embezzlement in school districts, healthcare workers who reported insurance fraud, and government employees who uncovered corruption, all credited the Operation Clean Sweep case with giving them courage to speak up. One letter that particularly moved me came from a young accountant in Phoenix who discovered her supervisors were manipulating financial records to hide environmental violations that were poisoning a local water supply. She wrote, "Your story showed me that doing the right thing might be scary, but staying silent when people are being harmed is much worse." The ripple effects of individual moral courage continued to expand in ways I never could have imagined. Universities began teaching case studies based on Operation Clean Sweep in their business ethics programs. Law enforcement agencies developed new protocols for recruiting and protecting undercover assets in corporate fraud investigations. Industry conferences regularly invited me to speak about the importance of creating organizational cultures where employees feel safe reporting suspicious activities. My presentations emphasized that preventing corporate crime requires both structural reforms and individual willingness to take ethical stands despite personal risks. The financial recovery from Manning's criminal enterprise exceeded $30 million, which was distributed to victims of the money laundering operations and used to fund ongoing investigations into similar criminal networks. Several international law enforcement agencies adopted techniques developed during Operation Clean Sweep for their own financial crimes investigations. Sarah Chen's conviction and imprisonment sent a powerful message throughout the corporate world that executive positions and professional reputations could not protect criminals from federal prosecution. Her case became a landmark precedent for prosecuting money laundering operations that used legitimate businesses as cover for international organized crime. Manning's 15-year sentence included requirements for victim restitution and cooperation with ongoing investigations into criminal organizations that had used his money laundering services. His fall from respected CEO to federal prisoner illustrated the ultimate consequences of choosing criminal profit over ethical business practices. But beyond the legal victories and policy changes, the most important lesson I learned was about the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change when they choose courage over comfort. The decision to document suspicious activities instead of ignoring them had seemed like a small choice at the time, but it ultimately dismantled a criminal network that was harming innocent people throughout the region. As I reflected on the entire experience, I realized that true strength isn't about avoiding fear or uncertainty. It's about feeling terrified and doing what's right anyway because the alternative, allowing criminals to victimize innocent people, is unacceptable to anyone with genuine integrity. The temporary suffering I experienced during the undercover operation was insignificant compared to the lasting satisfaction of knowing that my actions protected countless potential victims of financial fraud. When powerful people try to silence truth-tellers, they reveal their own corruption and weakness, rather than the futility of resistance. Sometimes the system works exactly as it should, but only when individuals are willing to take personal risks to ensure that justice is served. Manning and his criminal associates believed they could operate with impunity because they assumed that ordinary employees would be too intimidated to challenge their authority. They underestimated the power of individual moral courage combined with institutional support from law enforcement agencies that genuinely care about protecting innocent people. The FBI's willingness to invest resources and take risks to support my undercover work demonstrated that democratic institutions can be effective when citizens actively participate in maintaining them. The most profound realization was that choosing integrity over personal convenience creates ripple effects that extend far beyond individual circumstances. Every person who stands up against corruption inspires others to do the same, creating a culture where criminal behavior becomes increasingly difficult to sustain. My story isn't unique or exceptional. It's simply an example of what becomes possible when ordinary people decide that protecting others is more important than protecting themselves. The real heroes of Operation Clean Sweep were all the federal agents, prosecutors, and support personnel who dedicated their careers to fighting financial crime on behalf of citizens who will never know their names. True strength comes from recognizing that we all have the power to choose courage when facing moral dilemmas, and that individual integrity can triumph over systematic corruption when we refuse to stay silent about criminal behavior. Justice may sometimes be delayed, but it's never truly denied when good people work together to protect the innocent and hold the powerful accountable. The foundation of a healthy society depends on citizens who are willing to speak truth to power, even when doing so requires personal sacrifice and professional risk. My experience taught me that the temporary discomfort of challenging authority is always preferable to the permanent regret of allowing preventable harm to continue unchecked. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you knew something was wrong but felt afraid to speak up? What gave you the courage to take action, or what held you back from doing what you knew was right? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else who is facing a similar moral dilemma. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help others discover it. Subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary courage when it mattered most. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who might benefit from understanding that individual integrity can triumph over systematic corruption when we choose to stand together for justice. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that believes in the power of truth, courage, and moral integrity. Remember that your voice matters, your choices have consequences, and your willingness to do what's right can change the world in ways you might never fully realize. Stay strong, stay ethical, and never underestimate the difference one person can make when they refuse to stay silent about injustice.